Hi, my name is Kim Morris, and I am a home to home coach here for small group ministry at Richwoods. And thank you so much for letting me come into your home for a few minutes tonight or today as you get ready to discuss this week's sermon. And as you know, Jim has kicked off a new sermon series for the next 3 weeks entitled Lenses. And this week we are talking about if then or cause and effect. You know, if you do A, then you can expect B. And Jim highlighted the concept around our faith and that he talked about how if we do certain things, we can expect that God will bless us in certain ways. And if we don't do certain things, then we might expect that the hammer might come down. And Jim actually then talked about the dangers of actually wearing this particular lens. But how does that play out in our lives? I mean, we have cause and effect all around us. Take, for example, the fact that I'm a health freak sometimes and I like to eat healthy food. And I hope that as a consequence, that I would actually have a healthy body. And that pretty much does bear out. Some of you might be athletes and you know the value of putting in an extra hard practice or working extra hard at a certain skill that improves your performance. And it is a concept that we find in the Bible of reaping and sowing. If we sow good seed, we can expect to reap a good harvest. So, how does this work with our faith? I've actually been contemplating that question recently and asking myself, what is the blessed life? I mean, is it a life that is safe and predictable and without any real struggle? Or is it, as we look at what our culture seems to value, is it a life filled with riches and beauty, good health, fame, and fortune? Is that what the blessed life looks like? You know, how about for the millions of Christians around the world that are actually persecuted for their faith and find themselves in circumstances not of their own doing? I mean, what would you say about their life? Is that a blessed life? I actually had the opportunity to recently read a book by Nick Ripken called The Insanity of God. And in it, it's actually a very stirring story of Nick's life. And part of that time, he spends 6 years in Somalia in the early 90s when there was great civil unrest there. And he leaves the place after 6 years with a lot of questions on his heart and mind. He wonders, where was God in that forsaken place? And could faith actually hold up in harsh persecution? Because he sure wasn't seeing it there. And he and his wife actually have a long discussion about it. And he decides he wants to visit areas around the world where he knows Christian persecution is happening and see if faith actually can thrive in those particular areas. And so he sets out on a 2 year journey and begins to interview Christians that have suffered for their faith. And what happens blows him away. He is just amazed at the stories he's hearing. And what he comes to find out is that their faith is so vibrant and they know Jesus in a way that he does not. And he actually is somewhat envious of some of the things that he ends up hearing and how Jesus showed up in amazing ways in the midst of real hardship and imprisonment and torment. And he does end up in part of his journey going to China, as you might imagine, where even today the underground church is persecuted. And he is amazed by these individuals who are willing to go to prison quickly for their faith. And at one point, he actually has a conversation with a young Chinese Christian man. And as that man walks away from him, an older gentleman comes up to him and says, "Don't pay attention to what he has to say. God is going to use him in amazing ways, but you can't trust him yet because he's not been in prison." You see, they understood that prison was an opportunity for their faith to really grow, and that's where it did grow and mature, and where they would come to know Jesus in a deeper, more intimate way, and that it was really a time of blessing for them. And so I find that curious because that's something that seems so foreign probably to most of us, to look at the opportunity to be in prison as a blessing. And yet, I wonder if we only had Jesus, like many of the persecuted do, what that significant blessing would look like for us instead of some of the worldly blessings that might get in our way of seeing the more significant blessings that we could have. You know, I I know that Jesus tells us in his word that we will have trouble. I mean, there's no guarantees in this life that it's going to be um, smooth sailing for us. The fact of the matter is that this life is filled with hardship from time to time and struggle. Hopefully not for most of our lives, but even at that, it could be the case. And yet, are those opportunities to find the bigger blessing in life when we need Jesus the most, when our life seems out of control, when we're pressed in on every side and we can only turn to Christ. I think that while we're not suffering persecution like many around the world, we do struggle. And I think that we can find the blessing in that struggle. You know, in my own life, I can tell you that I once had an entitlement mentality. I basically saw myself as a good person and I worked hard, and so I should have a good life, right? I mean, basically, the good karma thing that because of my goodness, I should anticipate good things. And you know what? I did have a good life, at least according to the world. I had lots of worldly blessings. And then God made a way to the arrogant heart of mine and showed me that He had something so much greater, something so much more significant than what the world was offering me. And it was in His Son, Jesus, who became my Savior, my Redeemer, that by putting my trust in Him, that was a significant blessing that I could find nowhere in this world, that if I lost all my worldly blessings, that if I had Him, that was the greater blessing. And that's what my hope for each of you in your own lives as you go through maybe hard places in life, and even as I've gone through hard places, it's been in those moments where Jesus has been the most real to me because He's all I had. And I want you now, as you get ready to step into your discussion, to to think of a time where you felt like you were doing all the right things, that you should be blessed, and yet somehow you felt like you were not being blessed by God. I want you to think of a situation where that was the case and share with your group. I hope you have a great discussion. Thanks for listening.